In every heartache, there's a hidden seed of strength. Join Portia Booker on the Grief Grantor as we journey through stories of resilience, finding gratitude in the echoes of grief. Together, we transform sorrow into strength, pain into purpose. Welcome to the Grief Grantor, where your healing journey begins.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Grief Grantor. I hope that you all are doing amazing on this Super Bowl Sunday. Let me just say this for those of you who are watching the Super Bowl. May the best team win, whatever team you are rooting for. So I noticed something this week, you guys, that really led to this conversation that we're going to have today with Domina Rose, who's our Femininity Strategist. One of the things that I noticed this week was that I was suffering from burnout. Like when I tell y'all severe burnout, that's where I was. And I didn't recognize that the burnout was a result of me burning both candles at both ends. And what Domina is going to share with us today is how our wounded feminine and wounded masculine play a role in us having burnout. And let me just say this, you guys. With wounded masculine energy, I noticed that there tends to be this level of pride that we have, this hyper independence, right? Can anybody else relate to that? Those of you who are tuning in, anybody else can relate to that hyper sense of independence where you have to do it all, where you can't depend on anybody else because nobody else can do it the same way that you can. Anybody else can relate to that? And I noticed when I fall into that boat, that bracket of wanting to do it all because I'm afraid that it has to be perfect all of the time, I started to really feel the implications or impacts on a physical aspect, right? I feel lethargic. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to reach out to people, because another thing with wounded masculinity that plays a role in that is also not feeling as though you can ask for help. Thank you so much, Annette, for sharing that, because I think there's a lot of us who are in that boat today. And as we embark on the week of Valentine's Day, right? I'm sure that there's a lot of you who are out there who are in partnerships, in marriages or relationships, right? And how does that wounded masculine energy either hinder or also can help your relationship, right? It might even be a good conversation to have with your significant other or partner this week about maybe where you find yourself struggling with that energetic disconnect, right? Because I know for me, that was something also that my mom also struggled with, was being too dominant in her wounded masculine. And so one of the things that I'm proud of this week, you guys, that I did was I reached out for help. So obviously one of the people who I did reach out to help for is here tuning in live. So thank you, Mama T. Love you to pieces. And that took a lot, right? Have you guys noticed that when you ask for help, that it takes a lot out of you to do that? And one of the things that I'm grateful for is, number one, being aware that I was falling down this rabbit hole of almost being crippled, right? And I'm glad, 100%. Yes, Tanya, 100%. And I'm glad, I'm grateful that when I recognized it, I literally silenced that inner critic in my head. You guys know that I call my inner critic Rump Roast, right? We've talked about that before. I had to silence Rump Roast and say, you know what? I'm not going to struggle or suffer in silence anymore. I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to reach out for help. I'm going to reach out to my network, to my community for assistance. And that's another thing too, you guys. Let's also remember that there's certain people who we can go to that are going to embrace us with open arms, because there's some people who are going to open their arms up to us, but are they going to really embrace us with open arms of love, or are they just going to embrace us just to embrace us? Let that sink in for a minute. Are they going to open up their arms to us to be able to love on us, be able to give us words of encouragement, or are they just going to open their arms just to open their arms? Let that sink in and think about that throughout your week. So, you guys, we're going to take our first quick break right here on the Grief Grantor. And when we come back, we are going to be joined by our femininity strategist, Miss Domina Rose. She is backstage. She will be joining us to have this amazing conversation about how we can harmonize our masculine and feminine energy. So we will be right back here on the Grief Grantor.
Hi, I'm Kelly Melissa Reinhart, host of Make Mental Health Matter. Join me on Mondays at 11 a.m. and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on the Achieve TV network right here on E360 TV.
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. As I said before we went to the break, we are joined by our femininity strategist, Miss Domina Rose. Domina, welcome to the Grief Grantor. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? You can hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Yes, Perfect. I can. Domina, every day is great that ends in Y. And first, I extend my gratitude for you for coming on and really having this very urgent conversation that I think we need to have as we embark on the week of Valentine's Day. And there's a lot of women who are in different partnerships, or those of us who are riding solo dolo like me, who could use a little pick-me-up and reminder and refresher on our energy dynamics. So, Domina, I'm going to start off a little different with our conversation. You know, when you look back on your journey of finding that harmonization between your masculine and feminine energy, I'm curious, Domina, how has gratitude played a role in your elevation up until this point? Did learning about your wounded masculine help you to build stronger relationships with your partner, with your friends? So when you look back on your journey, how would you say the harmony between your masculine and feminine energy, how do you find gratitude in how that has elevated you?
I would say that when it comes to my gratitude towards that, it's a matter of being able to look back and see how far I've done, seeing how far I've come from where I first started to now. I keep it as a practice to constantly look back and recollect moments in time of when I first started this journey to where I am now, or whatever moment now may be. And it's really baffling, if I'm being honest with you, because I never thought, based off of my story, that I would be here today doing what I'm doing, teaching what I'm teaching, and yet here I am. And so being able to just sit with that and just be able to give myself a pat on the back and say, like, I did that. I was able to go through that, and I was able to excel from that, is such a big component to why I continue doing the work that I'm doing.
And what I'm hearing too, Domina, is there definitely is a harmonization for you in your masculine and feminine. Because what I know about the wounded feminine, I'm gonna actually jump right in, because I want you to share with our audience, right, the difference between the wounded masculine and wounded feminine. Because I think sometimes there is a misconception or a mix up between the two. And as I mentioned, wounded masculine kind of is this hyper independence, right? Where wounded feminine is more driven kind of by the shame, right? So can you elaborate, Domina, on kind of the differences between the wounded masculine and wounded feminine?
So the easiest way that I can put it is, when you're talking about the wounded feminine, it means that you're overly reactive. You react very easily from an emotional level. And if you find yourself doing that, then you automatically know, okay, I'm in the wounded feminine. When we're talking about the wounded masculine, that is going to be hyper independent. That's going, I mean, really, that's what it is, hyper independence. So if I had to simplify the two, that's how I would explain how you know where you're at as far as which one is wounded. Most of the time, when it comes to me working with clients, I know that both sides are fractured. Predominantly, the women that come into my world come from a more masculine or wounded masculine type of state. But obviously, if the wounded masculine is there, then clearly right behind that is the wounded feminine. So when you're able to identify the two, now it's a matter of figuring out, all right, how do I harmonize both of these energies?
And Domina, for your journey, right? It takes a level of awareness, right, to recognize that you keep falling into these patterns, right? And I'm curious, Domina, for our audience, what was that awareness or wake up call for you where you reached a point where you're like, I'm sick and tired of feeling this way? Why can't I build relationships? Why can't I achieve certain levels in my business or within my partnership? What was that awareness piece for you?
Truth be told, it's my now partner. When I first got together with him, I was fractured from both energies, and he was already very harmonized with both of his energies. So, coming into that relationship, I was still healing from a 5-year relationship with a narcissist. And so when I got into that relationship, not only was I dealing with the healing of that and all the trauma that was associated with that, but I was also dealing with the death of my father and the loss of my career and so many other things that were shifting all at the same time. And so I was constantly in this wave of burnout and depression, and he kept on hammering on, it's not that bad. Your life is really not that bad. You have so much to be grateful for. And yet here you are complaining about first world problems. And so the more that he kind of kept on hammering me with that, the more I realized, actually, you're right. It's not that bad. So that started the true trajectory for me to start really honing into what was happening internally, for me to then be able to identify what was that wounded masculine and what were those traits and what was the wounded feminine and what were those traits, so I can heal those two so then I could harmonize the two.
Domina, something that you brought up just now, which kind of really leads into this next part of the show, is you touched on the ending of a 5-year relationship with a narcissist, right? Your career also taking a nosedive, the transition of your father as well. And I'm curious, Domina, how does grief, right, play a role in number one, recognizing and healing from the dominance of wounded masculine energy? Because it sounds like to me, your current partner really helped you to kind of shift your mindset from a space of victimhood to a space of gratitude. So, how would you say grief, especially as you saw some of the comments from Annette, from Tanya, they can relate to this hyper independence that stems from wounded masculine energy? But how does grief from these losses or these transitions that you experience, how does grief play a role in recognizing and healing from the dominance of wounded masculine energy?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're wanting to know how, because I call grief depression. That's how I identify it.
Okay.
So how my depression kind of led me towards healing that wounded masculine energy. So I was really tired of pushing people away. And I knew that he was a really good person for me because he was helping me in ways that I had never been helped before. And what I mean by that is when I would say 99% of women could probably relate to this, that especially women in the wounded dominant energy, wounded masculine energy, they grew up, or I grew up, not having that sort of accountability, and not having that accountability and kind of being that lone wolf my entire life. It led me down that path of I can't trust anyone. I could only trust myself. And so that energy kept on pushing people away, whether it was friendships, relationships, or finding that I was with men that were more in their feminine when I needed someone who was more in their masculine to counterbalance the wounded masculine inside me. And so knowing that he was that person that was counterbalancing that wounded side of me really played a critical piece to my healing, because it started making me realize I could actually feel safe in his energy. He makes me feel safe, which allowed me to start doing the heavy lifting on what needed to be healed within myself, because I started noticing the difference between not feeling safe and feeling safe. And granted, it didn't just come overnight. It was something that there was a lot of communication that came from that helped me get to a space where I started to feel more and more safe. There was a lot of vulnerability that I had to take into account to be able to get to that place, to feel safe in my feminine, to speak my mind from a healed perspective, not from an overly emotional perspective, to then say, okay, I feel safe enough. I know that whatever I say to you, it'll be okay. And that allowed me to continuously level up in my healing journey to get to the point that I'm at today.
Domina, I thank you for being so transparent about that, because I could tell it took a level of strength to share that, right? Because there's strength in vulnerability, but in our mainstream society, there tends to be what I call an oxymoronic algorithm attached to vulnerability, right? Or there's some type of balancing act when it comes to sharing our truth and vulnerability. And as women, right, safety, right? We've had different conversations offline about the different journeys that I've been on where I haven't felt safe, right? And that's also part of the wounded masculine, right? Is not feeling that sense of safety. And how do you learn to build that trust again, not just within yourself, but also those around you? So we're going to take a quick break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Domina Rose. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, I am Sinead from Brador. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. Please join me in my Power Hour every Sunday, 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on E360 TV. Mwah!
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. We are joined by Domina Rose, our Femininity Strategist, and we were just having a great conversation about how our wounded masculine tends to play a huge role in how we develop relationships, not just with ourselves, but with our partners and with those who are around us. And so, Domina, really quick, before we jump into the next part of the show, if our audience wants to connect with you and learn more about you or work with you one-on-one, is there a website or a social media handle they can find you?
Yes. So my website would be fearlessxfem.com, and my Instagram, my Facebook would be at dominarose.x.
Excellent, excellent. So those who want to connect with Domina, you guys definitely can. So Domina, I gotta jump into this, right? Valentine's Day is Wednesday, right? I mean, and I know that there's a lot of individuals, right, who are in different partnerships, relationships, right? And when it comes to Valentine's Day, right, that's a day that we yearn for, obviously, connection, right? Deeper connection to our partner or whatever. Love is in the air, right? So, in your experience, Domina, how does wounded masculine energy impact one's ability to form and sustain romantic relationships?
When we're talking about the wounded masculine energy, like I mentioned, it's all about that hyper independence. So when you're in that state of hyper independence, you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop because your history has shown you that's always going to happen. But the reality is that's why there's a law called Murphy's Law, because what can happen will happen. So being able to understand that and recognize I'm going to take a leap of faith and I'm just going to dive right in. Whatever happens, happens. It is difficult when you're in the wounded masculine energy, because when you're in the wounded masculine energy, it's, I don't need anyone. But yet the feminine is saying, but I want someone. So it's this tug of war of, I don't need anyone, but I want someone. And then you're in this space of, well, what do I really want? Granted, though, most women who are in this space of the hyper masculine energy or the wounded masculine energy, they may not, like myself, may not recognize, well, what do I want? And that's the true key to all of this, because even when I was in my journey of healing both spectrums of energy, there was a time when I was in constant arguments with my partner and I couldn't figure out why. I couldn't figure out what was the root cause for so much resentment, so much anger, so much frustration, you know, depression, like all of these different emotions kept on rising up. And whenever I would try to explain things to him and communicate with him, I felt like it was going on deaf ears. And I know so many women can relate to this, because so many women who come into my world are always saying like, they're telling me the exact same things that my partner used to tell me, which one of those key elements was my partner always saying, I feel like I'm not good enough. Nothing that I do is good enough. And that is like, if you're hearing that, that is telling you you are too much in your masculine energy. So the pivotal moment here is asking yourself, like I asked myself, what do I want? Really sit with that and ask, what do I want? Because when I started really thinking about that, like when it comes to intimacy, like I would always tell him, I want more intimacy. But then intimacy wouldn't happen. And then I'd get upset and pissed off and I'd throw a hissy fit. But when after so many conversations of having this, I started to think, okay, well, nothing's changing. And I'm continuing to tell him these same things. So clearly I'm not explaining myself correctly. So if I'm not explaining myself correctly, then when it comes to intimacy, what does intimacy mean to me? Does it mean a back rub when I get home or after I'm done with work? Does it mean a candlelit dinner once a month? Does it mean more communication where it's just him and I distracted from any sort of electronic devices, whether that's TV, cell phones? Like, what does that mean? And once I started redefining what all of these words were that I was telling him I wanted, then I started breaking through into a deeper level of conversation, which built that level of intimacy that I was looking for, which started cultivating that level of safety that I was needing, because I felt like he now sees me, he hears me, and he understands me. But that didn't come from him, that came from me. So it started making me realize women have a lot more power in the relationship than we really recognize. Because if we're the ones that want things, but we don't know what we want, then how are they supposed to give us what we want? So we don't feel safe. We're in this wounded masculine, and then we continue in this wounded masculine, and then we're just in this hamster wheel that becomes a never-ending story.
You know, Domina, I love that you brought up the question of what is it that I really want? Right? And I'm sure with a lot of the women who have come across your path that you've worked with, a lot of them tell you what they don't want, right? And so I'm curious, Domina, how can more women reach that level of confidence where they're declarative about what they actually want in a relationship or out of one, right? If they currently are in one, where it can help to mitigate some of the arguments or the responses of I'm whatever I do is not good enough. How can they reach that level of confidence? What key question can they ask themselves, or what activity can they do to start building that level of confidence to build that stronger bond like what you and your partner have?
It's actually almost funny that it's so simple, because really what it is, if there's a pattern, then obviously you have to disrupt that pattern. And so if you're having the same arguments about the exact same thing, then you need to figure out, what do I want in that moment? Because if nothing's changing, then nothing has changed. And so if you can understand that and have that level of self-awareness and have that level of accountability to say, I need to change how I'm communicating to my partner, then at that point, you can start to dig deeper. Because the way that I see myself in my relationship, I almost see myself like a scientist, where I test different theories, they fall flat, and then I go back to the drawing board. And then finally I break through and I'm like, Eureka, I figured it out. And then change happens. And so if you are truly in a relationship where you know this person has what it takes to handle you, because that was a constant fear of mine, because I know I'm not easy to handle, because I know I demand a lot, because I demand a lot of myself. So that was a constant conversation that I had to check in with him every so often throughout our relationship until we got to the point that we're at now, where I was like, can you handle this? Because I'm going to constantly be wanting and expecting more, because I'm constantly expecting more of myself. So if you're in a relationship where this is the case and they have proven that they are in this for the long haul, then now it's your turn to take accountability for the change that needs to happen in the relationship, and just ask yourself that question. What do I need to change about myself to be better so that I can communicate more effectively to my partner to tell him what I want and how I want it, to build that level of communication and intimacy a lot further. And hopefully I answered your question, because I did go on a tangent right there, but I felt like all of that was very necessary.
No, and it definitely was, because you hit the nail on the head. What do I need to change? Right? What do I need to change about me to make this more smooth sailing? Right? Because I think that it's easy, right, to point the finger, right, in relationships and that, but it's hard to recognize that the common denominator is us, right? And so I think you really hit the nail on the head, asking ourselves that tough question. What about me do I need to change? If I keep having the same argument over and over again, every week we're arguing about who's washing the dishes, or we're arguing about, who's going to take the pups out for a walk, or if we're arguing about whose time is it to, go to whatever workout class or whatever it might be. If we're continuously falling into that hamster wheel, it reminds me of the phrase, if I do what I always did, I'll get what I always got. So if we're really going to pivot and build a stronger bond, it takes some shifting, it takes some changing, and sometimes we have to admit that, we're the ones that's wrong, right? So I appreciate you for sharing that, Domina, because I think that there's a lot of people here who it's very easy to deflect from reflection of us. I'm going to say that one more time. Deflect from reflection of us, where we have to really do that deep dive, what I like to call kind of poking the needle in your eye effect, where you have to go in. You have to go all in and really get to the root of it and not continue to sweep it under the rug. And Domina, when I think about obviously you and your partner, right? I can tell that there's been a lot of work that's been done on both your ends, right? Because you were once in this space of the disconnect of your masculine and feminine. Now that you've been able to harmonize it, it shows through your relationships, through your business, through what you do. And Domina, I'm wondering if we can pivot for a minute, right? Because obviously with Valentine's Day coming up, self-love is something that I find is a trending term, right? But the theme of Valentine's Day doesn't just encompass partnerships, right? Self-love also from single, solo, dolo people like me. So I'm curious, Domina, how would you say does embracing self-love contribute to the healing of the wounded masculine energy? And what practices would you recommend to individuals looking to embark on this journey of self-healing during this season of their life?
So basically, when it comes to self-love, this was a very tough one for me, because I grew up with narcissists. Every single person in my family was a narcissist. So naturally, I took on their characteristics. So I was very vain for a very long time. And it wasn't until this relationship now that he really made it known that I don't need to do all the glitz and glamour that I felt I needed to do. I wanted to do, but at the same time, it was almost like I needed to do it to feel good about myself. And he really helped me to deconstruct that, so that way I could not wear makeup or not have to constantly be doing my hair and be dolled up all the time. And it was very uncomfortable for me to be that way because I always felt like I had to do these things to portray a certain image. And until I was able to strip all of that away from me, and this is I would recommend this being a practice that some women do, especially if you feel like you have to put on some sort of mask, whether it's you have to dress in suits all the time or whether you have to, whatever the case is, to make you feel a certain way. Being able to strip all of that away, it made me realize I can be beautiful without wearing makeup. I can be beautiful in my flip-flops and sweatpants and sweatshirt. So being able to strip it down to the very fundamental basics of re-loving myself in the good times, in the bad times, when I look at myself in the mirror after not sleeping for 8 hours throughout the night because my pup has kept me up all night, whatever the case is, being able to still look at myself in the mirror and say, like, I still love you. No matter what, I still got you. That was a really strong practice that I had to implement in my life was I got me. If nothing else, I got me. Because being the type of individual that I am growing up as an emotionally orphaned child, I always had to be there for me. But it wasn't until I recognized the true meaning of what it means to be there for me, meaning I'm kind of stuck with me, whether I like it or not. You know, I might as well make the best out of it. So I have to learn to love my body in its imperfections and when I look banging. So what do I have to do to make that happen? So when I look in the mirror, I love everything about myself. Because if you're looking for validation, which was something that I used to do a lot with my partner and previously as well, seeking validation externally, but you're never giving it to yourself, you will never be able to receive it externally. You're going to be like, oh, you're my husband, you're my boyfriend, you're supposed to say those things. Or if your friends tell you like, oh, you look so pretty today, oh yeah, whatever, you kind of just brush it under the rug because you don't believe it, because you don't believe that you are that. So when you're in the wounded masculine, you aren't capable of receiving because you push everything away. So being able to recognize that means you need to learn how to give all of that validation to yourself, because nobody needs to validate you. No one owes you anything, as a matter of fact. And that was a hard reality that I had to learn for myself, that no one owes me anything. So I owe it all to myself. And so being able to embody that helped me to then start receiving more of all of that. As counterintuitive as that is, I think life, period, is counterintuitive. But nonetheless, being able to start giving yourself all those things. If you didn't have parents growing up, it's time for you to reparent yourself. If you never had friends growing up, you need to become your best friend. If you never knew love before, you need to give yourself that love. But you need to understand, what does that mean to me? What does being a parent mean to me? What does being a friend mean to me? Giving yourself all of that, practicing all of that, and then receiving more of all of that. Now you're in the state of receiving because you're safe in your feminine. So now you can start to receive more abundance in all of those different areas.
You know, Domina, I feel like I just attended a TED Talk, so I thank you for sharing that with us because, you know, that's so true, right? I think that when we reach a certain age, right, especially as adults, we tend to feel this level of we have to know it all, right? But the beauty is we can always get a touch up of some sort and a reminder. And that self love piece is an ever going and ever evolving journey, right? And I think, to your point, even for me, I struggled with that, where I couldn't even look myself in the mirror and say I loved you. But even now, every day, like, I can tell that I'm definitely on this path of healing, on this path of harmonization, because I look at me every day and I smile. Like, you can see it in my eyes, like, oh my God, like, I'm so happy about life. I'm so exuberant, right? When before I couldn't say that. I couldn't say that for the longest time, that I felt this level of happiness and contentment with life because I wasn't happy internally. So we're going to take another quick break right here, everybody, on the Grief Grantor. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with our femininity strategist, Domina Rose. We'll be right back.
Are you ready to illuminate your path and embrace your true purpose? Welcome to the Secrets of Being retreat in the breathtaking landscapes of Costa Rica. Experience a life-changing journey, surrounded by the vibrant energy of nature. Make connections with like-minded visionaries and changemakers like yourself. Discover the power of love and light as we dive into transformative workshops, guiding you to unlock your highest potential and radiate positivity. Connect with the wisdom of the earth, immersing yourself in the beauty of Costa Rica. Let nature inspire your journey of self-discovery. Awaken the visionary within, and let your light guide you to create a positive impact on the world. Join us at the Secrets of Being retreat and shine bright. Reserve your spot now and take the first step towards a purposeful, inspiring life. Embrace the secrets. Embrace your light. Embrace your being.
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. We are joined by our femininity strategist, Miss Domina Rose, and we were just having an amazing conversation about how to build that level of self-love within yourself, right? Because I think in order for us to really have other people to love us the way that we want to, that starts from us, right? What do we really want? We have to ask ourselves that question and not be afraid to relearn how to love ourselves, right? Because let's be honest, Domina, in the world that we live in today, there's so much information out there, right? Where it can be overwhelming on where to start. And I remember one of my friends, when they were working with me to do this like 21-day challenge to change my mindset, right? They told me to write, or not write, but say to myself in the mirror every day, I love you. For 21 days, they told me to do that. Excuse me. And the first time that I did it, like the first 2 days, I'm like, well, this is awkward, turtle. Like, I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I'm like, I love you, Portia. And I could tell that there was a disconnect. Like, oh, I don't like the way that came out. But slowly, as I started to do it, muscle memory, it got easier, right? But I had to make that first step, or take that first step to actually do it, right? It wasn't just going to make itself work, like abracadabra, alakazam. I had to actually take those initial steps to make it work. So, but I had to say that because it's so true, right? When you first do it, it looks a little wonky. You might, no pun intended, have you're walking down the street and you slip on a banana peel and, epic fail, right? So, but I digress on that moment. Domina, again, I extend my gratitude to you for coming on. One of the things, Domina, that I want you to touch on, especially because the Grief Grantor is kind of founded on this principle of forgiveness, right? And I think that for a lot of women, right, there's this level of this disconnect, right, of forgiving ourselves right? We forgive everybody else, but we tend to not forgive ourselves when we don't know what we don't know, when life hands us all these different things. So I'm curious, Domina, how did forgiveness play a role in the healing of your wounded masculine energy? And also, how did it pave a way for you to really attract the life that you have now with your partner?
It's an interesting question that I don't typically think a lot about. But what I will say is forgiveness for me was something that was very difficult because I was never the person, I was the person that held a grudge. I would say, I don't forgive and I don't forget. And you wrong me once and you're basically dead to me from that point forward. And so it was very easy for me to emotionally detach from anyone and everyone. Didn't matter whether you were close family, friends, whatever. But at the end of it all, it was very lonely because it wasn't a matter of, I wasn't taking accountability for myself to say I'm the result of doing what I did. Yes, people wronged me. Yes, things happened in my life and it jaded me. But the reality, like you mentioned earlier, is that I was the common denominator in all of that. And so that was a very hard pill for me to swallow because I didn't like being wrong. And so for me to sit there and say I was wrong about all of these things, and it's because I didn't take accountability for my actions in that friendship, to set those correct boundaries in that relationship with my parent, where I should have said no instead of said yes, whatever the case was. I really had to sit there and start to forgive myself because I didn't know any better. Because when it was all said and done, I was coming from a place of reaction rather than responding. And so that's one thing to really note is when you're in your wounded masculine and in your wounded feminine, there's a lot of reactions that are happening because you're not in control of your emotions. But when you really start to sit there and think about what actions you've actually taken out of reaction, then you can start to forgive yourself because now you know better and now you can change things. So now you can forgive yourself because now you've acquired the knowledge that you didn't have previously to start stepping with the right foot every single time you take the next step. And so forgiveness for me, like I mentioned, was very, very difficult. I did not want to forget. I was very stubborn when it came to that. But I knew it was for my own good. I knew if nothing else, it wasn't so much that people deserved my forgiveness, but I deserve that forgiveness for myself. So that way I wouldn't be stuck in that space of grief, depression, anger, resentment, sadness, whatever type of emotion you want to plug in there. And being able to forgive myself really helped me to propel myself forward because at that point, once I started to forgive, it changed the perspective that I had on reality itself because I started thinking, like I mentioned, no one owes me anything, but I owe myself everything. And so if I'm able to recognize that people are going to let me down, I'm going to let myself down from time to time. Murphy's Law is going to take effect every now and again, but that's okay. I'm going to forgive the past and move forward and not be stuck in the past, because when you're stuck in the past, you stay there and you're not progressing, you're regressing. And so when you forgive yourself, now you're progressing in the right direction. And that really helped me to further take accountability for myself and admit that I was wrong. And you'll see that it's still very difficult for me at times to admit that I'm wrong, but I know that I am. So I'm going to say it. But the little like 1%, 0.5% of me is like, oh, but am I though? Am I wrong? And it's like, no, I'm wrong. So I'm going just to own up to it. So.
And you know, Domina, I am like that too. I find myself at times not wanting to own up to the fact that I, you know, accidentally cut the blue wire instead of the red one. Like, you know, and it happens, and I have to sit with that. Right? I have to sit with that for a minute and be like, okay, Portia, we fell up the stairs today, and that's okay. What are we going to do to improve tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I ask myself. What are we going to do to improve tomorrow? Right? Because this is part of the growth. This is part of learning, right? I'm a firm believer, based on the book, The Game of Life by Florence Scovel Shinn. Man is not your enemy. Man is not your friend, for man is your teacher. Which means every experience that we have is learning experience. Everything. So I always ask myself, how are we going to improve tomorrow? What are we going to do better tomorrow? Right? Domina, I extend my gratitude again for you coming on. We're going to be wrapping up here soon. And I'm going to end this conversation a little different, because there's a lot of women, as what you saw in the beginning, who can really resonate with that wounded masculine. And maybe they're in a space where they feel as though their age, they might be aware that they're stuck in their wounded masculine like a prison, but they feel as though they've reached a it's too late to turn things around mindset. What tip or piece of advice can you leave with those women so they can break free from that mindset that they can't turn things around today, no matter what age they're at?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's never too late unless you're on your deathbed. That's the reality of it. There's never a moment of never being able to change the trajectory of your life. I don't care if you're 80 years old. I don't care if you're 70. I don't care if you're 20. I don't care if you're 45. Time is always moving forward, which means things are always changing. So again, you're either changing for the better or you're changing for the worse. And if you don't take accountability now, then when is it going to be the time? When is the right time going to happen for you if you're not going to take accountability now that you know this is what I need to work on? If I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, then what do I need to change so I'm no longer sick and tired? And so I consider myself old for getting to the place that I'm at right now with the mindset that I have. Because I would have loved to have had this when I was a teenager, a preteen, even younger. But Everyone's story is unique to them. And everyone goes through experiences because they have to go through them so they can learn a lesson. So whatever age you are, ask yourself, what lesson have I learned from this experience? So that way the trajectory of my life moving forward doesn't repeat the trajectory of my past. It's never too late.
In that order, it's never too late to turn things around, right? I always say, how bad do you want it? How bad do you want that relationship, that job, right? But it all stems from what I mentioned in the beginning. If I do what I always did, I'll get what I always got. Well, everybody, that was our Femininity Strategist, Miss Domina Rose, that you heard from. And that concludes another episode here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, peace and hair grease, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on the Grief Grantor. May the story shared today light your path and guide your heart toward healing. Remember, with every moment of grief, there's an opportunity for gratitude, resilience, and empowerment. Continue your journey with us online and share your own story, because in this tapestry of life, every thread matters.